The Miami Hurricanes. I know some of you are already laughing. Are they back? Sure, Brian. All right. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Listen, seriously. Are they finally turning the corner? To discuss this, I have Alex kind enough to join me from Locked On Canes, and we're going to talk about it right after this. Welcome to Clemson Football Live, my friends. Good grief. It is already almost mid-June. I know I'm pushing it a little bit. It's almost mid-June. Nice and warm up here in the upstate of South Carolina. Hey, if this is the first time you're seeing me, hey, I hope you will subscribe. Why? Because it's free. That's one of the reasons, especially if you like talking college football, especially Clemson football. I hope you'll subscribe. Also, I'm part of the College Huddle. The College Huddle is just a bunch of YouTubers and podcasters who represent their school. And Eric Boggs and the boys over there ask me to represent Clemson, which I don't think too many Clemson fans are thrilled about that. But I love you too. Who cares about what I have to say up to this point? Alex, thank you so much for joining me on short notice to talk about the Miami Hurricanes.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And that question that you asked at the top of the show, you're not wrong that a lot of Miami fans are tired of even hearing that question. Is Miami back? Because it's been asked every year for the last 20 years, and it hasn't been true in any of those previous 20 years. And so I can't give a hard answer to that question at this time, but I can tell you, Brian, and I'm sure we're going to talk about all this stuff. They're recruiting in a way I haven't seen Miami do, since the last time that they were relevant when it comes to locking down more of the top players, especially the South Florida players, because it's such a rich recruiting environment. And, at some point along the way, the Clemsons and the Alabamas and the Georgias and Ohio State really figured out we got to get more kids from South Florida because it's such a rich high school recruiting area. And, Miami just didn't do a good enough job. You can't keep everybody home, of course, but they didn't do a good enough job keeping a lot of the top players home. They figured that out. They've obviously been very, very active in the transfer portal. So when it comes to building a roster, Miami fans have some hope. Miami fans have hope that this could be the type of year where they can turn the corner. But for a lot of folks down here, you got to see it to believe it.
Sure. You're now kind of at that place where it's like, great, guys, I'm tired of talking about 2001. Show me something. So show me something. Let's talk about the transfer portal, something us Clemson fans know absolutely nothing about unless you're going to the transfer portal to get a grad assistant who just wants to coach later on and, we bring him. Anyway, off of that, you can tell I'm not salty at all over any of that. Tyler Van Dyke, he's no longer the man. You bring in Cam Ward, probably the most sought after quarterback in the portal. I would say Riley Leonard from Duke, but as soon as he hit the portal, he was already in South Bend. Cam Ward, and then a lot of people overlooking, unless you're a Miami fan or somebody like myself, Damian Martinez was a huge pickup. And it's just kind of like everybody's so fixated, and I get it, he's the quarterback, on Cam Ward. Let's talk about the transfer portal, how it's helped you, and then past those guys, who else you picked up that you believe could help you guys turn the corner?
Yeah, it was in some ways, it felt like a revolution through the transfer portal. And it had Miami not landed Cam Ward back in January, I don't know if they would have landed Damian Martinez in April or wide receiver Sam Brown, who put up really good numbers in Houston last year. I think Ward was kind of the spark that created the fire that caused more players to want to come down to Miami in the second transfer portal window. But to me, I'm expecting Cam Ward to be a big upgrade over Tyler Van Dyke. And I know that for anyone who only watched, Miami's former starting quarterback, Tyler Van Dyke, if you only watched him in certain games, if you happen to watch the good games, like he played exceptionally well against Texas A&M in a victory last year, he played really well a couple times against North Carolina, even though Miami didn't beat UNC when Tyler Van Dyke was here. But there were certain games where TVD, as we called him, just really, really balled out and played really well. But the problem was the inconsistencies. multiple interception games this past season, including everyone wants to talk about the knee that should have been taken against Georgia Tech. Also in that game were 3 interceptions that kept Georgia Tech in that game in the first place. And so, Miami is hoping that not only did they raise the ceiling of their quarterback room, adding Cam Ward, who just put up monstrous numbers the last couple of years at Washington State, and he offers a play extending element and the ability to run that Tyler Van Dyke didn't have very much of here in Miami. That Miami feels like not only did they raise the ceiling of their quarterback room, that hopefully they raise the floor, that Ward's going to be more consistent. Now, the one area statistically where Ward has not been consistent has been his fumbling. He's fumbled. Not all of these were lost fumbles, but he has fumbled 46 times over 4 years, which is a lot. Miami is hoping that A, he can work on ball security, and B, playing with what should be a much improved offensive line, because Miami's O-line on paper should be considerably better than what he had the last couple of years at Washington State, should be able to increase his ability to cut down on some of those turnovers. Interceptions have not really been Ward's problem. It's been the fumbling that has. But I had the privilege and the opportunity to watch, Ward practice at Miami throughout the spring football after he first arrived. And I see the arm, and I see the accuracy. I see the improvisation. I see the leadership. I think that that's the big thing that maybe goes a little bit unnoticed. And, being someone who gets to cover the program, I can see the way Ward rallies his teammates and a lot of things behind the scenes. He has guys over for dinner. He takes guys out to dinner. They have watch parties together. They've watched some boxing pay-per-views and UFC fights, a lot of team building from him. So I see someone in Ward he's really approaching everything like a professional for his 1 year at Miami, which gives me positive signs. We talk about bringing in Damian Martinez, the running back who rushed for, what was it, 1,200 yards almost this past season, and 9 touchdowns for Oregon State. Miami, they've had good running backs on their roster, but they haven't had enough depth, and they've had a lot of injuries the last couple of years at running back. So bringing in a guy like Damian Martinez, who's been super durable throughout his career, to partner him with Mark Fletcher, who was a true freshman last year, another big power back who had a really good true freshman campaign, should really help a lot. On the defensive side of the football, Miami addressed a couple of important needs there. They needed more depth on the defensive line. They added former Michigan State defensive tackle Simeon Barrow. They added former NC State defensive tackle CJ Clark. He already knows the ACC and has played in the conference at a pretty high level the last couple of years. They added a defensive tackle from Middle Tennessee and Marley Cook, who they seem pretty excited about. They added defensive end Tyler Barron, who he has bounced around a lot. The last place he actually played for was Tennessee, and he played very well there. So, I think the one area for Miami that kind of looks like a question mark on paper is the defensive secondary. They've got some unproven young talent there. They do have a couple of established guys in the defensive backfield. Darrell Porter Jr. at cornerback has a lot of experience, played well last year. They brought in a safety who might actually play nickel this year in Mish Powell from Washington, who was a starter, on the national runner-ups last season. Outside of that, they have a lot of young, unproven players behind a pretty good linebacker room. But the defensive secondary, that's an area on paper where you say, we have to wait and see. There are some question marks there. Otherwise, I thought Miami did a pretty bang-up job in addressing almost every need that they had in the transfer portal.
So let's talk about that for just a second. And for some reason, I'm messing up my screen right now. Please forgive me for that. Somebody's going to send me or make a comment going, "This is terrible." I'm sorry. Yeah, that was terrible. Let's get back to that. I pick it myself. It's no big deal. Restrepo, if I'm pronouncing his last name properly, I remember that guy did great last year. He's a senior. You got him back. When you have people like him out on the field, even though he and Ward's never played together, that gives you some confidence that, well, you have a playmaker out there. Damian Martinez coming in. He's a brutal back. I watched the guy play a lot last season because I was watching DJ play. I wanted to see how he'd do at Oregon State. But let's talk about the offensive line. Tell me a little bit about the offensive line. I know you have a few returning starters, but I really don't know anything else about, well, the rest of the guys. And kind of weave in there, if there is some deficiencies on the offensive line, how can the mobility of Cam Ward and the brutality of Damian Martinez actually help you out while they try to figure things out?
Yeah, so there's going to be two new starters on Miami's offensive line this year. One of those is pretty much set in stone. The other one, there's going to be a competition throughout fall camp. So as far as the returning starters, Miami's offensive line was probably the strength of the team last year. They get left tackle Jalen Rivers back for one final season. He's a senior this year. Rivers is probably going to be drafted maybe mid round next year. He'll end up in the NFL. The starting left tackle, the starting right guard, Inez Cooper, really had kind of a coming of age season last year. He had shown, I think last year was his sophomore year, and his freshman year he did pretty well in 2022, but he was a little bit too heavy. He was like around 400 pounds, and he really dropped some weight and picked up a lot of range and speed. And he's got a ton of physicality. And then the right tackle, starting right tackle last year, who's going to be the starting right tackle again this year, started all 13 games as a true freshman last year. Francis Maui Noah, who was a former 5-star recruit. He did really well as a true freshman last year. He did maybe have a few too many holding penalties, some rookie stuff. He'll probably clean up on some of that this year. But then Miami lost two important pieces from last year's offensive line, starting left guard Javion Cohen and starting center Matt Lee. So they already know Matt Lee's replacement is going to be Zach Carpenter, who's the former starting center in Indiana. He transferred to Miami in January. I don't know if he's going to be as good as Lee was for a year at Miami, but Carpenter, it's someone with a ton of experience. It seems like they can trust him to fill that role. And then for the left guard, that's the other open spot. That's probably going to come down to on the one hand, you've got Samson Okunlola, who's heading into would be his redshirt freshman year. He's a former 5-star offensive line recruit from the class of 2023. Ton of promise there. And Matthew McCoy is the other one who's going to be in his third year, I think a redshirt sophomore this year with the program. The two of them were kind of the first two guys up in spring football competing for that job. The competition's still going to go on into the fall. So, as far as the offensive line goes, there's definitely a couple question marks when it comes to replacing Cohen and Lee from last year. That's an area when you're talking about a Mario Cristobal coach team and his offensive line coach, Alex Mirabal, that's not usually something you worry about going back to his time at Oregon into Miami. So you think that unit's going to be in pretty good shape. And that was, I think one of the things that really attracted Cam Ward to Miami was expecting to have good protection, like having, high expectations for, hey, these guys are, I'm not going to be under duress as much. But for when Ward, obviously, you go up against some really good defensive lines in the ACC. Miami doesn't have Clemson on the schedule this year, but going up against the likes of Florida State, they're going to go up against Florida in a non-conference game to start the year. Louisville has got Ashton Gelati. He's one of the best pass rushers in the conference. So you're obviously going to go up against some good D-lines this season. Something that makes Cam Ward special is his ability to extend plays, his ability to manipulate the pocket. He can run, but being a running quarterback, that's not really his thing. It's more about extending plays and buying himself more time to throw is usually the way that works with Ward. And then as far as Damian Martinez goes, he perfectly fits the run style that Coach Cristobal likes with his teams going back to his time at Oregon, where, he loves and obviously any coach would love to have, a running back who's over 6 foot, over 230, can really just bruise guys and break tackles and knock guys over. Miami's got two running backs like that with Martinez and with Mark Fletcher. So, these are the types of guys that can definitely get a little bit more than what the offensive line gives them. Obviously, you hope to have some big holes. You hope to have some guys pulling and blocking downfield, but it's nice to know you've got, a couple of really physical backs on the roster. So I think one of the interesting things, like, I don't want to just sound like I'm like gushing about everything and overly optimistic, because I'm interested to see how the play calling balances out. Because of course, you've got Cam Ward, you mentioned Xavier Restrepo, Miami senior receiver who had over 1,000 yards last year. It seems like he and Ward are building some good chemistry in practice, that, the two of them they've become fast friends on the field. Obviously you have weapons in the passing game. Of course, you've got a physical offensive line and a handful of running backs who are going to want to tote the rock this year. I'm curious to see how the balance is from the play calling, and if you can keep everybody happy, right? Are you going to kind of ride the flow? And some games you're more of a passing team, other games you're more of a running team, because Shannon Dawson is the offensive coordinator at Miami. He definitely has some opportunities to get the football in the hands of a lot of playmakers out there.
Yeah, I mean, really taking what the other team has given you. There's and it's a different approach for each coaching staff. I think the most successful coaching staffs says, "Hey, look, if they're giving us something, even if it's not really our thing, but we still have some strength there, we take it. We take it because we know that we can dominate." So just adjusting to what the other side is doing or what they're giving you can open up things, and then it can set you up to where you can play what you want to play after you've taken advantage of what they've given you. That's always really interesting. Let's switch to the other side of the ball. Reuben Bain Jr. had a bang up year last year. Then, of course, you have Daryl Porter coming in. But you did lose some people. Let's talk about the defense. What are the thoughts on the defense? I believe, if my memory serves me correct, your two biggest recruits this year, 2 5-stars, were defensive players. Kind of shed some light on the players that, of course, you have coming back, but some of the players that, if I'm just thumbing through an Athlon or a Phil Steele, maybe I would overlook that actually will do quite well for Miami, or you expect that they'll do well on the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll talk about first real quick on the losses. The area that was most hurt is the safety room, specifically Cam Kinchins, who was arguably Miami's best player over the past 3 years, off to the NFL, and James Williams, who there was definitely some unreached potential at safety from James, but man, would just an absolute specimen. And there were a handful of games in his career when he just took over. So losing two safeties and having to replace both of those guys, it's why I refer to the defensive secondary as a question mark, because you have some unproven talent, specifically at safety. But Miami has the luxury of what looks like is going to be a really good linebacker room. The most important player to return, from last year was Kiko Mauinoa, who was, I mentioned Cam Kinchins was probably the best defensive player over the course of the past 3 years, but just last year, I would say Kiko at inside linebacker was probably the best player on Miami's defense last year. He decided I don't know how high he would have been drafted, but he did decide he had an opportunity maybe to hit the draft. He decided to come back for one final year at Miami, which was big because he sets the tone for that linebacker room. Some of the other linebackers who maybe are overlooked a little bit. Miami's other starting linebacker projected this year, Wesley Basaint, had some really good moments last season. He looks like he's really maturing and ready to do well. He's a former Miami Central High School standout, which was one of the most important high school pipelines to the University of Miami. A linebacker by the name of Popo Aguirre, who's probably going to be maybe the first guy off the bench. Miami also picked up a linebacker, Jalen Alderman from Louisville, who started all 13 games in a good Cardinals defense last year. So that guy can be a factor. But yeah, it all starts with the defensive line. And defensive line is the area where if they have the luxury of keeping most of these guys healthy, and if they gel together, which is the big challenge because a handful of transfers came in, Miami's defensive line looks like that they could be really the strength of the defense this year. You mentioned Reuben Bain, who is a true freshman last year, had 7.5 sacks, 12.5 tackles for loss. He could really take over games last season. I think he's going to get a lot more attention from opposing offensive coordinators this year, which is why it's important to have other guys around him. Tyler Barron, another edge rusher Miami picked up from Tennessee. They've got high expectations for him. Elijah Alston was an edge rusher they picked up from Marshall, who different conference, obviously a lesser conference, but he was a very highly rated pass rusher. He had a really good spring. A couple guys to watch out for. Simeon Barrow, another one at defensive tackle, and a couple of other guys to kind of watch out for that maybe are are a little bit less heralded. I think Malik Bryant at edge rusher, he's a converted linebacker. He's heading into his second year, came out of high school playing linebacker. They kind of figured out that the edge is the better spot for him, and he had a really good spring. I think he could be ready to do good things on a rotational basis. And, Miami's got some young defensive tackles. And you mentioned, Brian, the top-rated recruits that Miami brought in. They got a couple of 5 stars on the defensive line. Justin Scott was Miami's top-rated recruit. And he actually just about a week and a half ago arrived on campus. Because of his high school academic calendar, he wasn't able to graduate early, but he just arrived in early June. So he's starting to go through the offseason workout process. And another one, Armando Blunt, a 5-star from Miami Central. He was around for spring, but he had a minor injury, so he didn't really practice very much. But he's working really hard. He's a gifted athlete. So I think the defense, I don't worry about the linebacker group. You worry a little bit about the secondary because you're going to have a couple of new safeties there. I think Markeith Williams and Jaden Harris. These were the understudies for Kinchins and Williams last year. They're probably going to step up to be the starting safeties this year. Not a lot of experience. We'll see how they do. So the secondary safety room specifically, a bit of a question mark. I think the linebacker room is going to be fine. And I think the defensive line could be really the strength of the team this year.
Talking Miami Canes, Miami Hurricanes football with Locked On Canes with Alex. Alex, thanks for joining me on Clemson Football Live. And before I go any farther, just remind everyone, go check out his channel. Normally, I have his channel link below. For some reason, at this point, I don't have it, but I'm going to try to add it a little later on. Drop a line to him and let him know that you saw him here. I said that in a very weird way. Anyway, it's a long day. The weekend is almost here, everyone. I hope you'll subscribe, pass this along to anyone that you enjoy passing content along to. Even if they hate the look on my face, you can just send it on over there to them. So let's talk about the schedule this year. So, you hit on an interesting topic. You start off with Florida. Now, normally this would be like a big time game. Everybody would be like, oh man, we're playing Florida. By the way, Florida has the worst schedule I've ever seen in the history of college football. And not picking at Billy Napier, for some of you Hurricane fans who's joining me here today, are like, why would you not pick at Billy Napier? What's interesting, give you just some worthless background here. Billy Napier played college football only about 20 minutes from my house at Furman University. He was the offensive coordinator for Clemson way back in the beginning of the Dabo Swinney years. Swinney did let him go. He ended up obviously at Louisiana. We know what happened there. Now he's at Florida. I don't believe that Billy Napier will be the head coach of Florida by the end of the season. I don't believe that. And I think it was too much too soon for him. I don't think he's a bad coach. With all of that said, I know it's Miami versus Florida, but I mean, there's no reason why you guys shouldn't be the favorite in this game. And then, excuse me, after that, I mean, you have Florida A&M, Ball State, South Florida, Virginia Tech, that's in Miami. You're at California. Then this is where you start to get a little more in the meat of the season. You're at Louisville. We don't know if Brom can actually, work his magic again. It was quite impressive what he did there. Then Florida State, you have Florida State at home. You have Duke at Georgia Tech. And I've heard they've already thrown some shade at you guys. Then you have Wake Forest. And then Syracuse. I mean, as I'm looking at that schedule, I'm going, there's no reason why you guys shouldn't win at least 9 ball games this year. Like, it's realistic, and you could win 10. But let's get realistic here. What do you think? Instead of lobbing you a softball and saying, how do you feel about that? I'm going to ask you, what do you see out of your coaching staff? Because coaching matters. What do you see out of your coaching staff that you're afraid could actually undermine a 9 or 10 win season?
Yeah, I mean, it's some of the things you saw last year. I mean, no one will ever forget what happened against Georgia Tech, not taking the knee. And obviously there were a lot of other things that went wrong for Miami in that game, but they were literally a kneel down away from winning an ugly game, right? Which, it's the way that should have ended. There have been other times when, a lot of people will be puzzled, like how you can't take your timeouts home with you. Why are you leaving the game with 2 timeouts? It happens every now and then. So, there are concerns there. Like there are concerns that in close games, mismanagement from the sidelines can obviously, we've seen it can obviously cost you games, right? So when you talk about that schedule, and I agree with you, it for a power 4 schedule, Miami gets lucky in a lot of ways. They get lucky that they don't have Clemson on the schedule this year. You could only see them possibly in the ACC championship game. They don't have NC State on the schedule, which I respect as one of the better teams in the ACC. They don't have the Tar Heels on the schedule, which I think they may take a dip this year, but North Carolina's had Miami's number in recent years. That's never been an easy game for the Hurricanes in recent years. So I feel like they get very lucky with the way the schedule goes. Now, this is an opportunity for Mario Cristobal to prove that a lot of the narratives are overstated, because I do hear this a lot from, some Miami fans, but from a lot of Miami haters, that it's like, well, you guys will never win the ACC with that coach. Like, you're not going anywhere with that guy on the sidelines. Well, that guy did win 2 Pac-12 championships with Oregon, with a team that he built into, an amazing roster. Now, obviously Dan Lanning is still doing incredible things at Oregon, but Mario Cristobal did win 2 Pac-12 titles there. He did learn under Nick Saban for 4 years when he was the offensive line coach at Alabama. So I'd like to think that some of those narratives about Miami's coaches are a little bit overstated and a little bit unfair, but they definitely have to prove it. They definitely have to debunk that. And I think that, one of the great opportunities to do that is, obviously the decisions you make through your headset are extremely important to winning games, but we can probably all agree that what trumps most everything in college football is having talent, right? That, Kirby Smart obviously is maybe the gold standard right now, or one of the gold standards in college coaching. Not only is he a really bright guy, but he's also an incredible recruiter, and he's built 3-4 deep all-star team basically at Georgia. That's the sort of thing. I don't know if Miami will ever get to that level, but that's the sort of blueprint that they're trying to follow in recruiting, trying to build from the trenches outwards, trying to collect an incredible group of talent. And then that makes the margins a little bit wider for coaching mistakes. But those concerns are definitely out there. And then the other concern that's out there for Miami is, as we've seen, and it doesn't matter who's coaching, right? These problems have gone back long before Mario Cristobal was here. Sometimes Miami finds ways to make easy looking games not look so easy, right? And so, you've got potential trap games on the schedule. One of the teams that is out of conference this year is USF, the South Florida Bulls. Miami goes and plays them on the road in Tampa. That seems to be an ascending program right now. They gave Alabama a little bit of a scare last year in that game where, Saban decided to bench Jalen Milroe, and it nearly cost them that game. So that people look at that as a potentially a difficult out. You mentioned having Virginia Tech at home for a night game. I think that helps Miami out a little bit, but I think the Hokies are going to be pretty good this year. You've got to go out west to Cal. That's a really long road trip. Miami should be the better team, but I'm talking about the types of games that historically have been trap games for Miami. You've got to show, if you want to talk about turning a corner, right? If you want to talk about, the coaching not making mistakes that they made last year, if you want to talk about having better talent this year, which I think Miami has far better talent than they had last year, you've got to be taking care of business in some of these games that Miami historically finds a way to slip on the banana peel and lose.
Sure. And let's talk about some of the losses last year. And the reason I bring this up is because I'm a big advocate for, okay, losing is terrible and we should not be happy with it. But the question is, how did you lose? Now, one of the things I talk about also is coaching malfeasance. Clemson has suffered from some coaching malfeasance over the past 3 or 4 years. That's the reason why Clemson's on a regression. Now, let me properly divide that, not on the defensive side of the ball. Our defensive side of the ball is totally different. It's ran totally different than our offense. That's the reason why we lost a bunch of players, and nobody is worried about our defense, is because we have a brilliant staff on that side of the ball, and they've had a brilliant staff. Obviously, Brent Venables throwing the keys to Wes Goodwin, but Wes hasn't wrecked the car. That's what I always like to come back to. But when you're trying to turn the corner, you have to look at the games of last year, even though players are gone, but you still have a lot of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you still have a lot of the same coaching staff. Am I correct?
Yeah, they a couple new faces, new defensive backs coach, Chevis Jackson, and a new running backs coach, Matt Merritt, and pretty much everything else is status quo.
Well, folks, Alex, I hate to do this, folks. This is just teeing up. Before I get into the scores of last year and how that can be fixed, it's time for airing of the grievances.
With the airing of grievances, I got a lot of problems with you people.
Hey, listen, coaches are paid a lot of money, and I have absolutely no problem with anyone making a ton of money. Make it, baby. Take it to the bank. Have the school back that Brinks truck right up to the house, and you and mama go out there and get as much as you want, as long as you deliver. Because here's the deal. If coaching does not matter, why? Why are they paid so flippin' much? Why are they shocked when their unit's not doing well? I'm not talking about one of those years where you're rebuilding, you've had the injury bug hit you. No, I'm talking about you've had this unit. This is the product of your development or the lack thereof. Coaching matters. And Miami, especially in that Georgia Tech game, found out coaching matters. You can't hold your middle finger up to the fundamentals of football and not have it bite that finger off. And that's the end of the airing.
With the airing of grievances, I got a lot of problems with you people.
That deals not only with Miami, that deals with a lot of teams, especially the team I pull for. So let's talk about that. Last year, you lost, of course, the Georgia Tech game by 3 points. That's a 3-point loss, all right? You play Drake May, Omarion Hampton. I can't remember if was Tez Walker back by that time?
That was his first game back, I believe. Yeah, it was his first game back. Yeah.
So you lost by 10 points in that game. You lost to NC State by 14, but you lost to Florida State by 7. You lost to Louisville by 7. And I really don't count the bowl game, even though you lost by 7 there. But you were 7-6 last year. And folks, what I'm trying to get across here is if you look at just the 7-point losses, there's a 3-game swing. You've won, and I'm not counting the bowl game there, folks. I mean, there's what, 10 wins? I mean, and 9 wins? Regular season, 9 wins? So the point in this is it's not like you guys are getting blown out,
right,
or getting manhandled, but it's just the question of, can you turn that corner, and can the current coaching staff help you turn that corner? Let's talk about the schedule again. Opening up with Florida, very doable. It's a historic game on paper, but we both know it's not. Florida A&M, Ball State. This is a great chance for your team to get their feet up under them. South Florida, you do have to respect them. Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech's kind of odd. There's a great chance that you walk into that Louisville game undefeated and possibly into the Florida State game. 1 loss, maybe undefeated. So we will see. We will definitely see there. So let's say that Mario Cristobal, entering only his 3rd season, let's say he manages to walk into that Florida State game with like 2 losses. And then the Seminoles, who they're doing much better than what they were. Yeah. They come in, they commandingly beat you. And then maybe somewhere down the line, you have another Georgia Tech. I don't believe y'all will fire him, but it has to become extremely uncomfortable really, really quick. What are your thoughts on just, I mean, how do y'all navigate that if that happens? Because it's not out of the question. It's not out of the question. And Miami's faced a lot of bad luck over the past 20 years. So what's the mind process there?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. If it plays out, and I wouldn't rule it out, if it plays out the way you illustrated there, the seat starts to get warm. I think it would probably take all out catastrophe for Cristobal to lose his job this year. And when I say catastrophe, it'd have to be a losing season, something. Not saying 7-6, would that be acceptable? No. But to actually lose the job this year, I think it would have to be something like that or even worse than that. And the reason why I say that is the contract is a big part of it. I mean, Cristobal is in the third year of a 10-year contract. And in a lot of ways, I know people hear that and say, gosh, that's a long contract. In a lot of ways, I don't mind the long contract because it really gives you an opportunity to have some security when it comes to recruiting and program building. Because I think it's important for prospective recruits and assistant coaches to see stability. But then, of course, if you don't perform to the 10-year contract, then it can become a problem. I just think financially it would be very, very difficult, to formulate a buyout in the third year of a 10-year contract. So I think it would take probably a catastrophe to lose the job, but no, you would lose a lot of public support from the fan base. And, the fan base doesn't necessarily dictate hiring and firings, but it is important because the board of trustees is always taking the temperature of things like that. So you would definitely lose a portion of the fan base, and you would definitely lose some of the confidence from the decision makers. And, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because this is, not necessarily a direct tie into sports, but it could be. Miami's actually looking for a new university president right now. The former university president has just stepped away to become the chancellor at UCLA. He wasn't personally that involved in athletics anyway, so maybe the next president will be. But, until we know who that person is, it's hard to kind of, weigh how important the next university president is going to be. But yeah, the seat could definitely start to get very warm if things don't go well this year.
What's Cristobal's buyout? Do you know his buyout if they decided to get rid of him?
We can estimate it. So he's entering the third year of a 10-year, $80 million contract. So if you were to subtract 3 years from 24 million from 80 million, you'd say around 50, 55, 56 million dollar buyout is what you'd be looking at.
Sure. And when I looked at that timeline, I was thinking, oh no, this is one of those Jimbo Fisher deals, and because it was at the same time frame, and what one school does, the other school parakeets, and unfortunately, I figured that was the deal.
And they get parakeeted because I think most of these coaches have the same agent, and even if they don't, the agents copy each other.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm kind of hoping for the sake of the fans. For the sake of the fans, the schools, and for even the sake of the players, that we get away from these outrageous buyouts. I like giving the coach the confidence that I am here, they're invested, it's not that easy to get rid of me. But one of the problems that I have with the whole thing, and who cares what I think on this issue, but we saw this with Jimbo. I think Jimbo Fisher's a good football coach. I don't think that I question a lot of things about him away from football. I really do. But can you imagine going to bed going, get rid of me? They're going to pay me $75 million so I can do whatever I want to. And a lot of coaches actually think that way. Coach Sweeney, not to pick at him when he had his rant against Tyler from Spartanburg.
That was classic.
I know he infamously said, "Hey, I work for the board and for the school, and if they don't like what I'm doing, they can get rid of me." But he left out that part. I think that they'd have to pay him about $62 million to get rid of him. So it's not like if I were fired from my job that they would just say, "Hey, don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you. You're done." So I'm hoping that we can get away from that, and I think we're starting to see a little more of that because most human beings will become complacent because they just have that money there. So
it's such an interesting, just to comment on that again, like you're not wrong at all, because I think that definitely did happen with Jimbo Fisher. There's no question about it. I also like I'm open to the flip side if if I'm going to try to be glass half full on this, because
Sure.
one of the other issues I see in coaching, and it could be NFL, college football, NBA, anything, is when you're so concerned about your long-term job security, that can also cause, especially in college football,
Mhm.
if you're so short-sighted and you're only building a team for this year and you're not thinking about the long term because I may not be here, that can also create some negatives. I do think one of the things, and we're yet to see if this is going to pay off, but I think one of the things Miami was looking for, and why they really endorsed the idea of hiring Mario Cristobal, who's a Miami alum and is, very, very loyal to the program, was, if we do give him a certain amount of leeway and time, he knows, hey, we want you to build this the right way. And if that means you have to break it down for a couple of years to build it up, we're not going to hold the first 2 years against you, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
because there are certain coaches out there, if you don't show results within 2 seasons, you're out, right? Where,
Right.
Cristobal knew that wouldn't be the case. Now, if it backfires will be the question, but I think they wanted to make him understand, hey, if you need to really pull out a lot of weeds the first couple of years, we're not going to hold that against you. But I would think that this third year is the year that they need to start seeing proven results.
And I definitely agree with you. I just want to make that clear as well. I agree with you that, and here's a great comment from one of the Clemson Football Live members. He said, and this was early in the video. He made this comment. Said, I don't think they're giving the coaches enough time to get their system established. 2 or 3 years is a top window. Roger Parks first. Thanks for supporting the channel. $3 or $5 per month. If you want to support the channel, you can join. Unless you're on an Apple iPhone, you won't see that join button below here. But Roger, thanks for supporting the channel. And most of all, thank you for your comment. That's 100% true. There has to be maturity on both sides of the coin here. We can't have schools looking at Cristobal. We can't have Miami. We just use Miami here, looking at Cristobal going, hey, man, we need to be back in our 80s, 90s, year 2001 performance and air and respect and just the expectation. We can't have that, or we need that now, and we need you to do that in 2 to 3 years. That's not okay. There's got to be a balance somewhere. There's always an overcorrection. So I'm hoping that somewhere in here we can get some type of realistic balance. But yeah, I think that if they were to make a move, unless he just absolutely went out and wet the bed, I think it would be dumb. And there is a place, it's kind of like how the ACC looks bad right now with their handling of certain things. The University of Miami would look bad. And then at that time, it's like, hey, you fired one of your old boys, somebody who
Right.
believed in the program. I mean, who really wants to go down there and coach? So that's just not Miami. That's anywhere. So that'll be interesting. Any thoughts that you want to add, not only on the Miami season, but maybe in the ACC or college football this year, that maybe is piquing your interest or something that you're watching?
It's just incredible how much this sport is changing and evolving. I was going to use that word. It's probably not the right word because it's happening so quickly that it's not really an evolution. It's more of like an eruption with all these changes with the way these super conferences are being built up. And I know for all the Clemson fans watching this, you're very aware that Clemson is suing the ACC and Florida State is suing the ACC, and now that this House versus NCAA settlement is going to cause revenue sharing to become a thing within the next couple of years. And so it's fascinating the way that this is all blowing up. And as far as the ACC goes, I think it's pretty open this year. Florida State are understandably the favorites on paper, but they obviously have to replace some very important playmakers from last year. Jared Verse and some great players from that defense from last season. Obviously, Jordan Travis and their 2 top wide receivers from last year they've got to replace. And so, you have to wonder, are they going to be able to repeat what they did in the regular season last year? I'm sure there's a lot of questions about Clemson. Can they stay where they're at or even improve from last year? What kind of a season is Cade Klubnik going to have? And then, can a team like Miami actually back it up on the field and turn the corner finally? And then there are other teams out there. I'm anxious to see what Louisville does, because Brom had an awesome first year back at his alma mater last year. So I feel like the ACC, it looks pretty wide open to me. That I'm anxious to see maybe at 6-7 weeks into the season if we can kind of figure out who the best two teams are. But right now, I really have no idea who the best two teams are going to be. So I just can't wait. Like I can't wait for fall camp to start. It's probably going to be late July for most programs around the country, and then end of August we get the games rolling. It cannot come fast enough, and that's about all I got.
Well, I'll tell you why there was a delay there, was because I was actually adding your channel link to this video. So anyone who wants to go over and say hello to Alex, please do that. As I said, I added the link below the video and drop a line to Alex. Yeah, I mean, this is a really, really odd time. Like you said, there's a lot of, to me, it's like crock pot issues that could have been dealt with over time and been dealt with better. And then something happened, and then suddenly we popped the roast into the microwave and said, cook. And, if you put a piece of steak in a microwave, for some of you, you should know that that is disgusting. But that's kind of where we're at right now. You're 100% right. There's a lot of things that's happening really, really quick. That's why such chaos is going on. That's why there's so many questions. There's frustration. And then the league as a whole, I mean, NC State, and I had the guys from Locked On Wolfpack, had Kenton and Grayson on.
I love, and by the way, Kenton and I, we co-host Locked On ACC together. Kenton's great, and his partner on that show, Grayson, is awesome as well.
Yeah, they were fantastic, and actually that's how I found out about you, is because when I was scouting them, I found you, and I was like, this is great, because I need to have someone on to talk about Miami. But we were talking about how NC State. And Kenton really made me think about this. Is one of the reasons I want to have him on the show, is that when he was talking about the very school he played for, he said, hey, look, we are great until the season starts, and then suddenly we're the Penn State of the ACC. And I was like, I need that honesty on my channel now. Yeah. NC State is going to be an interesting story, because everybody's focusing on Clemson and Florida State because of how many years we've basically ran the ACC. Clemson with the regression. Can things be fixed, especially on the offensive side of the ball? If you fix things on the offensive side of the football, Clemson is once again an ACC championship contender, a 10-win season. Everybody will chill out and, this, that, and the other. Florida State, there's questions there. We all know about that. There's questions about you guys. Some people saying Cam Ward's here and everything. And off in the distance in Raleigh is this team that really has a lot of talent, and maybe they become the Penn State of the ACC this year, but I really think that team is going to prove to be a problem for a lot of teams, so that'll be interesting. As I said, I left the link below here, but just tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. First of all, you're awesome. Your listeners, seeing everybody in the live chat, you guys are awesome. Yeah, you could see my X handle. I've got a personal one as well, at Alex Dono, but at Locked On Canes is where you'll find most of our college football stuff. So check it out there. Check out the show Locked On Canes on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All the audio, we're on pretty much every platform there. So check us out. And also check out Locked On ACC, because Kenton and I, we do talk some Clemson on that show as well. We talk about all the teams in this conference that we love to hate so much. we talk about all that good stuff. So check out Locked On ACC and Locked On Canes.
Wonderful. Alex, thanks for coming on the show. Everybody, if you are here because, well, you follow Alex and Locked On Canes or Locked On ACC, I do invite you to stay. I do talk about other teams as well. I hope you'll subscribe. Drop me a line and let me know that, well, you're here. And I look forward to hopefully working with you again, Alex. Everybody, thank you so much. Subscribe if you haven't. That's the easiest and cheapest way to support the channel. I'll catch you next time. As always, go Tigers.